Staff Sergeant Lauren Kaine stood near the edge of the command tent, her rifle case resting against her boot, listening as Lieutenant Brennan ran through the final mission brief. His voice was smooth and clipped, practiced. He traced a route on the digital map, then gestured toward a small high-ground marker. He said she'd hold that position, keep eyes on the valley, and relay comms if anything went sideways. His tone was polite, but the message was clear. She wasn't part of the real action. Brennan didn't look at her when he called the SEALs forward for final gear check. Neither did Chief Grant, who half smiled and muttered something under his breath about paper targets. Nobody asked for her range card or her sector plan. Nobody asked if she'd confirmed line of sight across the ridge. They just nodded when she moved to leave, like that's where she belonged. Out of the way, she didn't push back. There was nothing to say. She'd been through this before, and she knew how it worked. They didn't see her the way they saw each other, not with that guard patch on her shoulder. Outside, the air was cold and thin. The mission was set for 0600, but the light was already shifting when she reached the ledge she'd scouted the day before. 700 meters of hard elevation now separated her from the team moving through the forested valley below. She checked her optics twice. Then once more, wind out of the west, at 3.2 meters per second. Stable. Her rifle sat clean across her knees. She pulled the loop of her ghillie hood over her braid and watched the trees. No one had thanked her for making the climb. No one asked how long it would take to exfil from her position if something went wrong. That was fine. She didn't need the conversation. What she needed was a clear line. A stable position. And time to think. She settled into the rocks, exhaled slowly, and watched the line of figures disappear into the shadows. They hadn't looked back. That, too, was fine. They wouldn't forget where she was for long. Lauren Kaine grew up in Butte, Montana, in a house where the snow stayed longer than it should, and the air always smelled like pine and cold steel. Her grandfather, who'd fought at Heartbreak Ridge, taught her to shoot when she was barely tall enough to see over the fence post. He had a rusted spotting scope, a long scar across his chin, and a voice that never rose above a whisper. Her father had once been an army captain. He came back from Fallujah with shrapnel in his back and a right arm that barely worked. But he still managed to steady her aim by correcting her breathing. Every Saturday morning, while other kids were watching cartoons, Lauren was lining up tin cans at 80 yards with a .22 and no optics. When she missed, she had to explain why. Wind, sight picture, trigger squeeze. By the time she turned 14, she could hit a milk jug at 300 meters using iron sights. In crosswind. From prone, her father said she had her grandfather's steadiness and her mother's stubborn streak. Her hands were callous before her voice ever was. It was at a regional junior match near Helena that a recruiter from the Army Marksmanship Unit spotted her. She hadn't placed first that day, but the way she moved between stations caught his attention. Smooth, deliberate, focused. He talked to her afterward, told her she had something most shooters didn't. She didn't say much in return, just nodded and shook his hand. At 18, she enlisted and shipped off to Fort Benning. She trained like she had something to prove. Even though she never said so out loud, she became the youngest distinguished riflewoman in her battalion and was the only woman in her sniper school class. 43 students, only 28 graduated. She finished in the top 5. There were no speeches, no applause. She packed her gear and moved on to her next assignment. For 3 years, she competed internationally, long-distance precision, moving targets, dynamic weather. She brought home awards, but none of them mattered as much as what she kept hearing her father say. Shooting without purpose is just expensive noise. That stayed with her. Every time she pulled a trigger, it meant something. When the Army tried to keep her stateside as a competitor, she pushed harder. She put in for every combat slot she could find. Got turned down. Tried again. Eventually, she got orders to ranger school. The men there didn't know what to make of her. But she didn't show up to be liked. She showed up to pass. And she did. Afghanistan came next. She didn't go to prove anything. She went because it mattered. Because someone out there might need the shot only she could make. The briefing room was tight and dry, lit by a pair of humming fluorescent panels overhead. It was 7:15 a.m. Staff Sergeant Lauren Kaine sat in the corner, boots laced tight. Her notepad balanced on one knee. Lieutenant Brennan stood at the front, sleeves rolled, jaw set as he talked through the mission. His voice was clipped, confident. He outlined ingress points, movement intervals, fallback routes. When he finally got to her role, it came with a pause. Kaine will hold overwatch from this ridge. He tapped the digital map with the stylus. She'll monitor comms, relay updates, and stay at least one click clear of any direct contact. His eyes didn't linger. His tone didn't invite discussion. It was a soft dismissal, polished and professional. Chief Petty Officer Malik Grant didn't bother with polish. From the back of the room, he muttered something about National Guard shooters being great at paper targets. Not much else. A few heads nodded. No one looked her way. No one asked for her sector diagrams. No one reviewed her range card. Meyer Holloway, her own battalion's operations officer, just cleared his throat and moved the brief along. She expected that. It still landed the same. Lauren didn't flinch. She flipped her notepad shut, tucked it into her vest, and started building a list in her head. Grant's mags were taped wrong for quick reloads. Rodriguez's radio antenna was sticking up just enough to silhouette. Their movement plan was too tight for forest terrain. She counted 2 high-risk choke points on their projected path and flagged them both as likely ambush zones. No one had asked her input, so she didn't offer it. She just noted the blind spots and the distance to each. Her father's voice came back to her, steady and low. Pride deafens men. Assumptions bury them. When the briefing ended, the team moved out fast. She lagged behind on purpose, keeping clear of the noise. Her climb to the overwatch point was deliberate, 700 meters of steep terrain. The same route she'd scouted 2 days before. By 8:30 a.m., she was prone in a bed of rock and low brush, her M2010 resting steady on the bipod. Wind was holding steady from the west. She dialed in her scope and settled behind it. Below, the seals advanced through the tree line. Close intervals. Straight line. Predictable. She said nothing. She just watched. Through the loophole Mark 5 HD, Lauren Kaine watched the team move below. Their formation was too tight. 5 meters between operators, maybe less in spots. Fine for open desert. A problem in dense of forest. Their silhouettes moved in a straight, predictable rhythm across uneven terrain. Heads down. Rifles canted slightly outward. She scanned past them, adjusting her scope from 800 to 900 meters. Wind still held steady out of the west. She'd studied this valley 2 days earlier, walked it alone with a range card in one hand and a compass in the other. She had marked 2 specific locations as high risk. Right now, the SEALs were walking straight into the first. Her eye caught a flicker. Just a flash, less than a second. Not sunlight, but reflection. Wrong angle. Wrong color. 20 meters up the opposite slope. Tucked into the shade behind a cluster of rock and pine. Something shimmered. She adjusted parallax and blinked once. A thin strip of glint tape, maybe glass. Then another detail. A bush that hadn't been there during her last recon. Taller than the others. Still. Too still. Her chest tightened. At 8:52 a.m., the PKM opened up from the ridgeline. 700 rounds per minute. Heavy and abrupt. Echoing across the bowl-shaped valley. The first burst stitched into the trees beside the lead seal. Wood splintered. Dirt kicked up. Voices jumped on the net. 2 more machine guns joined in from flanking slopes, their fire forming a tight L-shaped kill zone. Lauren's fingers moved on instinct. Radio traffic flooded in, Brennan yelling for cover, Grant shouting grid coordinates. Someone screamed. They were pinned. The team scattered, diving behind logs and rocks that barely covered half their bodies. One operator rolled too far and took a hit in the leg. Rodriguez. From what she could see, she heard Brennan call for close air. Apache support. ETA 22 minutes out of Bagram. Lauren didn't flinch. Her hand slid to the bolt. She dialed elevation. Wind steady at 3.5 meters per second. She scanned up the northern slope. 2 Taliban fighters scrambled to set up an RPG. One crouched behind cover. The other positioned the launcher. Adjusting aim. Her breath dropped into rhythm. In. Out. The world tightened. The first shot broke at 740 meters. The sound was muted by the suppressor. The recoil absorbed by years of training. The round struck the gunner high in the chest, just left of center. He dropped without a sound. She cycled the bolt. The second man reached for the launcher. She led him by a foot and fired again. The shot caught him in the lower rib cage as he twisted. He collapsed into the brush. The SEALs didn't know where the fire came from, only that 2 threats were suddenly gone. Lauren exhaled slowly. She shifted position by 4 inches, scanned for movement, and locked onto the next target. A pair of fighters dragging a PKM toward a ridge break to the south. They had 20 seconds before they'd have a line on the SEAL's rear flank. She adjusted windage. The world narrowed again. 1 breath in, 1 out. Heffinger settled. The next shot was already halfway there. The valley echoed with fire. Wood cracked. Dirt flew. Voices shouted over each other, layered into chaos. Staff Sergeant Lauren Kaine moved through it all like water. Her eyes stayed fixed behind the glass. The Leupold scope picked up heat shimmer now. Waves rising from the rocky slope where she lay prone slope. Her barrel had warmed, but the M2010 still tracked steady. She rolled her cheekbone into the stock and worked the bolt. The brass casing bounced once against her forearm, then fell still in the dirt. At 600 meters, a 2-man RPG team was shifting from concealment. The gunner dropped to one knee. His loader moved to unclip the tube from his back. They were fast. Trained, Lauren was faster. She held her breath. Half mil right for wind. 2 clicks high for elevation. Confirmed at this range. She pressed the trigger. The round hit just below the collarbone, spinning the gunner backward. Before the loader had time to drop flat, she cycled the bolt and fired again. That shot landed center mass. He folded like paper. She didn't wait. Her hand moved to the turret, adjusting windage as the breeze kicked slightly north. The PKM team she'd spotted earlier had repositioned to her left, crawling toward a break in the terrain that would give them enfilade fire on the SEAL's cover. She watched the gunner drag the bipod into place. The assistant gunner fed belt. They hadn't seen her. 750 meters. Uphill angle. She adjusted for drop and squeezed. The round hit just below the sternum. Dead center. The assistant gunner flinched. Tried to run. She hit him before he reached 5 paces. Radio traffic spiked. Brennan was calling for backup. One of his men was hit. Another was running low on ammo. The panic rolled through the net. No one knew who was helping. They just knew someone was out there, laying down perfect fire. Lauren reached for her handset. She clicked once, paused, then clicked again, down in the valley. Brennan stopped talking. Then the voice that followed was different. A low murmur of realization, half belief and half hope. It carried like a thread through the noise. Somewhere out there, someone was watching over them. Lauren returned to her scope. Her breathing never changed. 800 meters to the southeast. A man in a black vest ducked between rock outcrops, holding a Motorola radio in his left hand. He wore a chest rig and moved like he was giving orders. She tracked his position across 30 yards of broken terrain. He stopped near a ridge break, paused to key the radio. She led him by 2 feet and fired. The round struck just beneath the clavicle. He dropped mid-transmission. For the next 3 minutes, she dismantled the attack piece by piece. Each shot measured, each threat prioritized by proximity, weapon type, movement pattern. She took down a spotter crawling into sniper position. She dropped a runner, carrying RPG ammo across the rear line. At 400 meters, she caught a fighter advancing through a shadowed draw, raised his rifle, then dropped in place. Her breathing stayed even, 1 round every 4 or 5 seconds. No panits, no rush. The scope was her world. Through the glass, she watched Rodriguez get dragged back by Grant. Blood on his sleeve. Brennan shifted left, yelling instructions while returning fire. One of the SEALs flipped to burst fire, trying to keep the flank covered. They were hanging on, barely. Then, overhead, the Apache rotor wash started to build. At 9:17 a.m., the first helicopter cleared the ridge. Lauren didn't move. She stayed on target until the chain gun spun up and the last threat scattered into brush. She lowered her rifle. Her hands were steady. Nina confirmed the kills. Every shot counted. She rolled onto her side and exhaled. The ridge fell quiet. The last bursts of gunfire faded into echoes. Then nothing. Dust settled over the valley like a curtain being lowered. The Apaches hovered for a moment, their blades thumping low and steady, then peeled off to the south. Down below, the SEAL team stayed low, scattered among the rocks and trees, waiting for the all-clear. From her perch above it all, Lauren Kaine eased her cheek off the stock. The rifle barrel radiated warmth against her gloves. She checked the bolt. Clear. She didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. She unscrewed her suppressor, slid the rifle into its case, and began breaking down her hide sight. 1 step at a time. Brush. Netting. Loose stones, all packed with the same methodical calm she had carried through every shot. Her heart rate never speaked. Not even now. That evening, back at the operations center, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Lauren stood near the comms board, sipping a lukewarm coffee, still in her dusty fatigues. Lieutenant Brennan approached slowly, helmet in hand, sleeves rolled up, a new kind of weight in his voice. He said she had saved them, that he had been wrong. She just nodded. A moment later, Chief Grant stepped beside him, his arm wrapped tight in a sling. He didn't make a joke this time. He reached into his pocket and held out a small black coin. No ceremony, no speech. Lauren took it. Then she turned and walked out into the night. 6 months later, the Georgia heat wrapped around Fort Benning like a wet sheet. Staff Sergeant Lauren Kaine stood at the firing line with a dozen soldiers lined up beside her. Some were brand new. A few had combat patch. All of them were listening. She walked the row without raising her voice. She checked stances, breathing patterns, trigger discipline. When she stopped at the center of the line, she said the same thing she said to every new class. Shooting without purpose is just expensive noise. No one questioned her tone. They didn't have to. Word had traveled. Not in headlines or briefings, but in quiet conversations between instructors, between teams. Someone had held a ridgeline when no one else could from. Someone who hadn't worn a tab that got her noticed. Someone who just did the job. The Sniper Integration Pilot Program had been built from lessons learned overseas. The Army wanted flexibility, precision, people who could adapt, blend in, and disappear again. Lauren was the perfect example. She didn't brag. She didn't explain. She taught. She taught how to read terrain by feel, how to judge a shot by the wind through the grass instead of the numbers on a screen. She taught patience, stillness, how to move only when it mattered. Most of all, she taught them how to lead without needing attention, that when the time came, the quiet ones didn't wait to be called forward. They already knew where to stand. In the end, Lauren Kaine didn't need recognition. She never raised her voice, never asked for credit. What she left behind was quieter than a speech or a medal. It was a reminder that real strength doesn't draw attention to itself. It shows up, holds steady, and does the work when everything else falls apart. Her father used to say that purpose matters more than praise, that precision without meaning is just noise. On that ridge, with 9 shots in 5 minutes, Lauren didn't just protect a team, she proved that quiet skill, when matched with patience and principle, can shape the outcome of something far greater than herself. Her story isn't just about a soldier. It's about the value of the overlooked, the people others pass by or count out, the ones who don't take the room, but hold it up when it starts to break. It's easy to judge someone by their title or their patch, harder to see what they're made of until the moment matters. Lauren taught us to pay attention to the quiet ones, the still ones, the ones who wait for the wind, then move with purpose. They're often the ones who save everything.